My name is Neil Pettigrew. I'm the Vice President of Exploration and a Director of Palladium One, and I'm very happy to speak with you today about our various projects and the exciting exploration that we have going on.
Neil, good to talk to you again. We last spoke back in February when the world was a very different place. You had made the discovery of Tyko in Northern Ontario, your nickel sulphide discovery, earlier in the year in 2021, or you got the prize in 2021, didn't you? And you were drilling out the PGM copper nickel project in Finland when I last spoke. Since then, the world has gone to war. You've published your maiden resource, and I've actually bought shares in Palladium One. So I'm a shareholder, but I've bought shares before the share price actually came right down in the in the spring. So I'm sitting underwater. Before we move on to the Canada story, do you want to just kind of encapsulate kind of where you've got to in Finland?
Sure. So I am very happy to hear you are a shareholder, and I think we can do something for you here in the near term. We have a lot of news flow going to be coming out of our Canada operations. But as you say, Finland really had been the focus. And last time we spoke, we were moving towards that initial resource in Kukua South and the resource update on the whole property. And that was, in our view, quite a milestone for the company. And although our timing could have been better, we actually did double the resource. We went from 2 to 4 million ounces of palladium equivalent at about 1.5 grams per ton equivalent. And, this was a very solid resource, whittle pit constrained. We invested a pile in metallurgy on it. We were able to produce very saleable cons from this material consistently. And so we do really want to continue with that. But, as we've mentioned, Canadian operations are really coming to the fore here with our high-grade nickel discovery at Tyko, and that's where the bulk of the exploration has happened this year.
Thank you. You've also bought a nickel play in the Yukon. You bought Canalask. What a name, Canalask. I'm sure. Why wasn't it called Canalask? That they missed a trick there.
Well, it's only a few kilometers from the Alaska border, I think, is how the name got there. So,
and you bought that from Victoria Gold, and that's an old kind of nickel occurrence that's been known about for decades, but has kind of had a little bit of work done on it. But I'd like to talk about that perhaps later. But the kind of the thrust of it and where you're drilling at the moment is Tyko.
The Tyko is a thrust, and yeah, we're going to have to chat about Canalaska because that's a real diamond in the rough that Derek was able to extract from Victoria. And but Tyko is the focus, and we've been actively drilling that since sort of late spring, early summer. We're just finally starting to get the assays flowing out of that. We had a release last week from our new West Pickle discovery, another smoke lake type zone. And so, yes, this is actually a very exciting and developing story that's happening at Tyko right now, in that we believe we have not just a new nickel property, but a nickel camp underway here. So,
can you show me a map? Because in that news release, or in fact, that you a month earlier, there's a news release that talks about the intersections you made in holes 58 and 59. And then the assays follow up from the news release last week. But you talk about a kind of this 20-kilometer trend. You talk about the various untested EM anomalies. Talk about, there we go, the chonoliths. I think there's a typo on
yeah, I think there's a typo now that you mention it. The chonoliths, or feeder dikes, as many people understand them to be. So we have actually come a long way in our geological interpretation of the Tyko property. When last we spoke, we had our high-grade discovery at Smoke Lake, which is what we won the 2001 Northwest Ontario Discovery of the Year award for. That had up to 10% nickel equivalent over 4 meters at surface. And
that's 2021, yeah, not 2001.
Oh, sorry, yeah. So at the very fall of 2021 was that discovery. Yeah. So in the very end of 2020, and we had visual results out that December, and then assay results in January of 2021. So we made it just before Christmas.
Okay, so it was a Christmas present 2 years ago.
Yes, very much so. And that changed our whole perspective on the property. We then significantly expanded the property. We flew the whole project with VTEM Max, because this area, and this area has never been mapped by the Ontario Geological Survey. It is what I call an atypical host for nickel. We're in a tonalite batholith out here. And because of that, no one has really spent hardly any exploration in this area. And this is one of the reasons that we're having so much discovery success, is that we're in a part of Ontario, that's surrounded by mines, Hemlo, Geco to the north, the Sugar Zone to the east, that's never been explored. And, West Pickle and Smoke Lake are less than 2 years apart as far as discovery goes. And they're 20 kilometers apart. And so this is where I get back that we believe we have a new nickel camp on our hands here. What you're looking at is our interpreted conoliths, or feeder dikes, as many people would know them. And these things are preserved within the batholith. And they do not... yep, go ahead.
What is a conolith? I know the feeder dike is the simple word, but give me a bit more context, please.
So a conolith is basically just the plumbing system that would have fed a larger mafic ultramafic body or a volcanic pile. And many people think of it as a simple dike, but it's rarely a dike. It's usually more of a one-dimensional body that sort of follows whatever fractures and stuff can go up to the rock. And it's that complexity as it goes to the rock that provides all the traps to physically host the sulfide mineralization.
And are these long-lived structures? Do they live through the life of a batholith? Do they feed multiple pulses or phases of emplacement of intrusive rocks?
So this is where things get a little interesting, is that these feeder dikes actually predate the batholith. And so they originally intruded a metasedimentary belt. And that's where we actually had the original deposition of the nickel sulfide. And they would have been very long-lived then. They're very much the same type of system you would have at Avoysies Bay or Norilsk, where you're feeding a much larger mafic ultramafic intrusion, and we have this very large bulldozer intrusion to the north, which may have been fed by these dikes, or it could have been completely lost to erosion, and we're just looking at the roots of the system now. So the complexity is, with the batholith came in, is it digested the metasediments, and the ultramafic rocks, however, do not assimilate easily into a felsic melt, and the sulfide is immiscible in a silicate melt. And so what's happened is that we have preservation of the original conolith structures, as well as actual concentration, and I believe upgrading of the grade of the massive sulfide, which is actually physically remobilized into the tonalite and into the foliation of the tolite, because it's now an orthonise actually.
And presumably this is you get some kind of fractionation where the chalcophile, the sulfide, the sulfides get attracted to the ultramafics, and so that's perhaps where you kind of get that, what you're talking about as an upgrading or an enrichment.
The upgrading, it seems like the batholith came in and it cooked everything, right? So it really raised the temperature of the stuff, and it remelted the sulfide out of the ultramafic, and it appears to have concentrated in some areas. And so where we have thicker sections of ultramafic, we have more traditional blebby, locally net textured patches of sulfide that you would see in a typical system. But when we get into the very massive stuff, it tends to not be in areas where there is much ultramafic. You can have tonalite on both contacts, and the only clasts of ultramafic are actually within the sulfide themselves. And that's where we get the uber grades, the pentlandite eyes, the size of quarters, and up to 10% nickel individual assays. And so it is a very unique environment, but it also is producing exceptional grades. It's not very common to see these type of nickel grades, especially at surface in Ontario these days.
I like the quote that Brad Lazich made. You included in the news release in early September. He said, "I've seen a lot of pentlandite, but this really takes the cake."
Oh yeah, so he comes from the Sudbury camp, right? And he was very involved with the discoveries that were made there, and with Glencore, and he's seen a lot of sulfide in his day, and the stuff that we released, earlier last month, the visuals, those literally are pentlandite eyes the size of quarters. They are very exceptional type high grade material. And when we just had the Smoke Lake zone, a lot of people would say, well, that's an interesting one-off. Well, now we have a second zone, West Pickle, and you can take the core between those two zones. And I will just go down here to the West Pickle, slide here, and you can see those giant pentlandite eyes, right? So, the sulfide mineralization between the Smoke Lake occurrence and the West Pickle Lake occurrence looks identical.
What's the continuity of these things? Have you been able to put in fences or kind of holds above and below just to kind of test the vertical extent?
So at Smoke Lake, we have defined the lens of massive sulfide. They're still open with disseminated mineralization, and that's what we're targeting this year. We did IP around it, as well as looking at doing depth extent. So you're going to have lenses of the high grade. I would love to say we have 10 million tons of 5% nickel. Wouldn't that be grand?
Wouldn't that be nice?
Yeah, wouldn't that be nice? No, what you're going to be seeing is probably a series of lenses, and of this really high material. Plus, there's potential for more bulk tonnage, like RJ and Tyko. RJ has 1% nickel over 60 meters in a more disseminated type system.
1.6 or 6.0?
1.04% nickel over 16.2 meters.
16.2. Oh, sorry, there it is. I can see it there.
Yeah, sorry, right over here.
Yeah.
So what we see developing here is when you get into these type of feeder systems, you have multiple lenses of nickel. And so far, everything's been quite shallow. Smoke Lake is at surface. West Pickle is about 150 meters down. And, you're probably going to have a situation where you have a series of these high-grade lenses that eventually make up, an economic deposit.
Looking at that mag image, or is it a mag image? VTAM,
in the background,
sorry.
Yeah. This is mag in the background, yeah.
Okay, mag in the background. What gives you the confidence that the way you've interpreted your conoliths, they are conoliths, not other linear features such as the northeast southwest striking features?
So as you can see here, there are a lot of diabase dikes. We have a northeast set, the Biscatazing. We have a northwest set, the Marathon, and then we even have a north-south set, the Marathon Swarm.
I can see
they tend to be more. You can see this big one here, yeah, quite clearly.
Yeah,
right?
and then at the bottom you've got the northwestern ones, haven't you? Around the bottom of that image.
You can see some of these ones down here, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So what we don't see in the diabase dikes, which are Proterozoic and much later, is these more east-west trends, right? So these east-west trends, and they're more discontinuous, appear in the mag, and we have chewed into some of these conoliths and drill core, and they don't tend to weather up, unfortunately. So when you're out mapping, all you see is white or class. The batholith is actually very dirty, as I like to say. There's tons of xenolith, class, roof pendants, what you want to describe in it. But you don't tend to find them when you're out mapping. But when you're drilling these features, you do see them. And, we have quite a bit of ultramafic rock at RJ, as well as Tyko down here that is preserved within the batholith. Now, these are interpreted. For instance, this one down here, we haven't done any drilling on, and they need to be ground tested. But what we are seeing is that, there is more preservation in the batholith than anyone would have thought. And this is why we're having the success we are having, is that it's out there to be found. So we're going to be getting out and doing a lot more drill testing of these. We want to get out and do some more mapping, and soils have worked very effectively for us on this project.
How many of those have you drilled and they haven't had nickel in?
Well, some don't have nickel. You can get some ultramafic rocks that, don't necessarily host significant nickel. They will usually have elevated, right? Like a 0.1 or 0.2. In a typical feeder system, and I will go down to RJ here, because RJ has more that's disseminated style mineralization, is you get this sort of blebby stuff like that, right, in the ultramafic. And we also occasionally get textures like this, which are actual brecciated ultramafic clast in a matrix of sulfide. And this is what you would see in the throat of a feeder type system where you're having violent pulses of magma and sulfide being deposited in basically a breccia. And so those textures are very, very helpful. This one down here is an example of some of the remobilization that was fed by the granite, and there's a later granite phase as well as tonalite. And we actually get this remobilized a few meters away from the ultramafic. But I'll go down to the Tyko zone, and this is more typical of what you might see, right? So you have this sort of blebby, locally net textured sulfide within the ultramafic. And these were the original two showings. The Tyko showing actually dates, I think, to the 60s. Was the original nickel showing on the property, and hence the name.
Wow. This is a new concept for me, and I'm struggling a bit.
You are not alone in that. I do a lot of explaining about how this project came to be, because it has got some geological complexity.
When you're talking about the kind of the digestion of the metasediments by the batholith, the intrusion, and the massive sulfides are preserved. But you also said that quite a lot of, there's more than you expected of the ultramafics that are preserved as well.
Correct.
Those ultramafics weren't part of the sedimentary system. They were part of an earlier phase of intrusions.
So I am going to throw up a quick slide, which I think will help show some of this that isn't in the presentation. And the truth of the matter is that it is a complex story, and so we are working at trying to get it across. And so hopefully this will help a little bit here. So just give me one moment. What we have here is a good old-fashioned block model for all the geologists out there. This is a bit more complex than I normally go into with the average investor, but I think for this conversation, it would be very helpful. So, on the left here, we have basically the emplacement of the mafic ultramafic system into the upper crust, which in this area was a metasedimentary belt, so clastic metasediments. Yeah. And, this upper level material has all since been lost, right? So, we are on basically the western side of the Kapuskasing structural zone, which is basically a mega thrust. And so we're in what they call the Wawa subprovince, but really it's just an extension of the Abitibi. Where in the Abitibi you have high-level preservation, so low-level green schist, even pumpelliate facies, and all kinds of mafic volcanics. On this side, we have a lot of amphibolite facies, a lot more granites, and a lot smaller greenstone belts. But really, it's just an extension of the Abitibi. So if we go into the second block model, you can see there's basically your classic conolith structure that's intruding metasedimentary, and then you get sulfides within the material, plus you get footwall accumulations just beside the mafic ultramafic dike. And so that's what you would see at Voisey's Bay, because Voisey's Bay, the ultramafic came in after the orthogneiss, right? So basically you're seeing, or at Talon is another great example, which basically has been frozen in time since the day it was deposited. Yeah. We have an older system, it's Archean. And so what we've had is we've had the tonalite invade that metasedimentary belt. It's broken it up. There's huge rafts of metasediment in it. And we have broken up the conolith structure, but the sulfide is preserved and has basically been transposed into the foliation of the orthogneiss. And so what we have found is that there's a surprising level of preservation. And so you actually have these sulfide lenses, and you can see they kind of get squished around a bit. But they almost seem to find each other. And so the sulfide seems to almost accumulate, like basically strain partitioning into the sulfide and dilation, just as you would have in gold system. That sulfide flows. And so it's got some similarities to the Thompson camp, where you have sulfide accumulation in the hinges zones and stuff like that.
Yeah. Space accommodation and kind of just flowing into the kind of slightly lower pressure areas within the strain, within the stress fields.
Yeah, so in West Pickle, we actually have it following the mineral lineation, which is subhorizontal out there. So you have it sitting in the plane of the foliation, and then the main core of it appears to be sitting in the mineral lineation. So we're actually doing a lot of orientated core and very much gold type things on this project right now in our attempts to continue to follow these things.
Okay, really helpful. Thank you. I understand that much better now. Could you drop the screen for a second, please?
Yeah.
So now I understand the kind of or I've got a much better understanding. I wonder if I'll retain the memory or the knowledge of the kind of morphology of them and how they form. How do you vector to them? You mentioned geochemistry, and you've mentioned that you can pick up the conoliths with the VTEM as this east-west structure. What are your methods for ascertaining ranking your targets within that array of east-west conolith kind of target areas?
Okay, so I'm going to jump back onto this slide again here. And yes, so we're very reliant on geophysics. And so because the plumbing system has been disrupted, and we are dealing in this atypical environment, we've really relied on EM. And we were very successful with flying the entire property with the VTEM MAX system. So in a little bit of history, the Smoke Lake anomaly was actually found in the 80s by Noranda when they were looking for another GECO VMS deposit. It was at the very end of one of their lines, and it was a strong conductor, but it was in the batholith. So no one ever bothered to check it out. So it sat there for 40 years.
And because batholith tonalite equals unprospective.
That's right. We like to call it turnaround rock when you're doing your mapping, right? I used to work for the Ontario Geological Survey. You'd map all the green rock and you'd hit the white or the pink rock, and you turn around and go start traveling the other direction. And so there's a bias in geology that, you know, the batholiths and the granites are unprospective, and so you shouldn't bother looking there, right? And even some of my project geos this spring, they come out and one of them said, Neil, we've got to get out of here. There's nothing but white rocks everywhere I'm driving around. And I was like, well, no, wait a second. Wait till the core comes out of the ground. And you know, then all of a sudden you're looking at mafic, ultramafic, and copper nickel sulfide. And it's just a function of the fact that they're recessively weathered, right? These are soft rocks. They're all now chlorite, talc, serpentine, and actinolite. And then you've got this highly resistive quartz feldspar rich rock around, and you just don't see them much at surface.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons this area has never been mapped by the Ontario Geological Survey, is that it just does not appear to be prospective. But, you know, after we found Smoke Lake, we found several other multi-line conductors. We got out there last summer and did soils, all of them. We got good nickel copper anomalies on them. And yeah, we made the discovery on West Pickle Lake, you know, just early this fall. We also still are waiting on a few permits. We have our Koopa Lake over here, this isolated block. It's got very strong copper nickel, and we believe that is another one. We're hopefully to get that permit in the next few months. And so, you know, that would put a 30-kilometer strike between Koopa Lake and West Pickle. So once again, a nickel camp. And one of the things that we are really keen to do is that these conolith structures, you got to remember the VTEM only works for about 200 or 300 meters down. You know, so if you have other massive sulfides along these conolith structures, you're going to have to do deep drilling and downhole EM to chase them. And so we think there's a lot of potential along these structures to host other massive sulfides that might just be out of reach of what's seen from the airborne, and the potential for disseminated as well. Like we have.
Sorry, did you say that the VTEM covers the first 200 to 300 meters, or only picks up below 200 or 300 meters?
Well, it depends on the size of the target, obviously. So if you had Norilsk, you would probably see it a kilometer down. But if you had, you know, some of the deposits you have in, you know, Kalgoorlie or something with the komatiites that are smaller, you're not going to see those much below 300 meters.
Okay.
So you've got that top 300 meters you kind of see with the VTEM, and we have a lot of single line conductors as well. And they might just be more semi-massive disseminated, and there's just enough of it to pick up, you know, like this target right here that's sitting on this conolith. And we're actually positioning to drill this very shortly, where we have about a 2 or 3 line conductor. They're weak conductors, but they're sitting right on this mag feature that appears to be another conolith structure. So that might be more indicative of a disseminated or, you know, semi-net texture.
What's the line spacing that you flew?
We flew it at 100-meter line spacing.
So 2 to 3 line conductors, 100 to 200 meters, kind of weak anomaly.
Correct.
Okay, interesting. And you mentioned that geochemistry works. So how much do you use that, and what's the till cover and or the glacial cover here?
So it's a combination of sort of basal and ablation tills, but it also has a fair glacial fluvial overprint in some areas. Surprisingly, it works quite well. What we see is it works right over top. So both at Smoke and at West Pickle, we were getting anomalies pretty much right over top of the mineralization. And it's been an excellent vector. And one of the reasons that it works so well is that the background is so low. So being in the tonalite, same with the geophysics, is that there is no sulfide in the tonalite. There is nothing. And so the background is essentially zero. So you have great resolution on the geochemistry, just like you do in the geophysics. So, you know, even a 20 ppb nickel anomaly would be way out of range for what the batholith would produce. And we sometimes get 500 ppb nickel anomalies. And so they stand right out. And the geophysics is the same way. Because the background rock is so low, we have great resolution when we actually do find something with the geophysics. And so when you're normally flying it, you've got too many conductors, right? And you're always trying to sort the wheat from the chaff and trying to figure out which anomalies you want. Whereas we have very clean data, and then when something spikes up, even if it's small, it needs to be checked out.
Great. Now we've got the well, since we've still got this map up, can you just talk to me about the kind of the size of the drill program, what's been done, and what you're aiming to do?
Okay, so we're planning to drill between 10 and 12,000 meters by the end of this year. We are fairly well into it. We have not released a whole pile because we've been waiting on a ton of assays. And so you'll notice with our last release, we put up to hole 70, even though we only had results for one hole. Hopefully to have more results very shortly. We've just had, we're looking at 2+ months turnaround from the lab these days for nickel. For some reason, the base metals seem to take longer than the fire assays. So, we're going to have a lot of news flow coming this fall and into the new year just because of the situation with the lab. So there is going to be quite a bit more information flowing from the Tyko project in the near future here.
Okay, so I want to steer a healthy course away from any kind of potentially price-sensitive information. But can you just tell me roughly where the 10 to 12,000 meters is planned to go?
So obviously the bulk is going into West Pickle,
Okay.
but we have IP targets in the bulldozer intrusion as well as around Smoke Lake and some of these VTEM targets down here. If we get the permit for Koopa, we will drill there as well.
Sorry, where's Boulder?
West Bulldozer is the large intrusion here. So there's IP targets with copper anomalies we're going to test there. We are also testing IP anomalies around the Smoke Lake zone, as well as some of these more isolated VTEM targets down here. And we did drilling on RJ and Tyko as well. We drilled 400-meter pilot holes for downhole geophysics there to look for more deeper sulfide. So we did a short helicopter program for a month in late August, early September.
Into RJ because it's inaccessible.
Yeah, you could get there in the winter, but it's a long, you're talking about probably a 7-kilometer bush road to get in there. And so it's much more feasible just to do it with the helicopter. And so we did, about 2,000 meters with the helicopter, at the end of summer, early fall, in order to hit some of these targets in here and test some of these conolith structures, right? So the idea is to actually get out there and do a lot of this work, not just focused in one part of the property, because we do believe this, as I've said before, is really a nickel camp that's developing. We're really starting to see scale.
And you mentioned the bulldozer, that intrusion. It's got a very different signature to the other target areas. Do you still see the potential for these kind of tone light hosted massive sulfides?
So this is still predates the intrusion. It's just there's a very large pancake-like sill, it appears, and it is broken up. It's marbled with tonalite dikes and everything else. It just has a lot of magnetite in it, so it tends to show up quite well. And the big question is it related to these features down here? Because it obviously predates the tonalite, so it might have been the same age. It has quite a bit of copper in it. There's several copper showings, including the bulldozer showing, which had some high-grade copper remobilized into a shear. And so it is mineralized. It is much more copper-rich than these ones down here, which are much more nickel-rich. So I'm not sure if it's higher up in the system or if they are related at all, but it is very obviously a very large mafic, ultramafic intrusion out there. It has everything from gabbro to dunite phases to it. So, that is also on the hit list. It's just that, obviously the West Pickle discovery, because of the Smoke Lake grades, that's sort of taking the focus right now.
So when you say you're kind of quite a good way through that program, you're going to, and you've got a 2-month lag on the drilling. Let's say you wrap up the drilling in the next few weeks, early months. You should get most of the drill results out this year, or maybe some coming into the beginning of next year.
There'll be quite a bit in January. We'll be drilling probably right up until mid-December. So we did a $5 million flow-through raise last year, and that needs to be expended by the end of this year. And so we are going to be drilling probably right up into the end of the year. We had a bit of a slow start. We had a slower time getting our permits. We didn't really start drilling until late spring. And, so you're basically seeing that surge, of information coming now. And so, we just released our first assay results last week. We're going to have significant more now that are finally starting to come through from the lab. But I would be expecting results to flow right into February.
Okay. I noticed that you mentioned in the news release that delay on the permits, on the drill permits. Is that going to be a feature of working in the area, or have you kind of got a full pipeline? And what's the permitting process going to be like going forwards?
Well, I mean, the permitting process is theoretically a 3-month wait, but if you're familiar with Ontario or Canada in general these days, is it takes a bit longer to get your permits, right? So, and we had the same issue with Smoke Lake. That took 8+ months to get the Smoke Lake permit. We waited almost 12 months this time to get the other permits. We still have a couple of outstanding. We have 4 of our 6 permits on the property now. So we do have a record of getting the permits. It's just that it takes longer than we would like. If you took the permitting delays away, we found Smoke Lake and West Pickle less than 12 months apart. So
would you do you think it makes a difference being a part on the critical minerals list in Canada or North America, or was that just
I do think
just a kind of a banner, and that actually the bureaucracy just does its own thing?
Well, it helps, right? I mean, obviously we are a poster child for critical minerals and especially battery metals, in North America. So it helps. But at the end of the day, we do have to go through the various consultation processes, and there is sensitivities, in the area. And Canada as a whole is not as easy to permit as it used to be, right? So, I mean, Finland is actually easier these days, and we've had great success bringing stuff to, permit out there. But I must reiterate that we have gotten the permits on Tyko. It's just that there is going to be longer delays than what officially is out there to get them. That's really what we've seen.
Yeah, well, it's you're not alone. It's a story the world over.
No, it's a frustration, but it's just another part of doing business these days.
I talked to my environmental friends and I said, all of this, you've got to embrace mining. I just say you've got to, if we want to do any degree of this energy transition that people are talking about, then we just need a lot more mining. We've got to make it easier to open mines and explore for mines, and their eyes kind of pop and they go, "Oh, really? I hadn't thought about that." But
oh yes, if you want to transition to a distributed, energy system, you're going to need to dig. Like, I mean, the amount of metal required to make this transition is so far beyond what many people realize.
Yeah.
So, but you do have to do it in a responsible way, right? And so, do you want to export that to the third world, or do you want to do it in the first world? And I think it's much better to do in the first world, where we have real environmental standards. And, this is another thing that we really do care about with Palladium One is, on the ESG front. Like, I mean, we operate in first world countries, right? We have our projects in Finland and Canada. And, these are countries with strong environmental regimes, right? And, this is an important feature, I do believe, of this company.
Agreed. Now let's move on to Canalask, the project in Yukon. Can you just tell me about, before you pull up a slide, can you just tell me how you reviewed the process and how you found it and what the conversation was and what the philosophy was?
Sure. So this area was identified by one of our directors, Peter Lightfoot, who you probably know, and was a worldwide expert in nickel, as a good place to look. And so we did. We had a look to the area, and we identified this project. And it really is a bit of a diamond in the rough. This project was a Falcon Bridge project. They were actively drilling it right up to 2008 when, they got taken over, and then they dropped a whole whack of properties and got reorganized. It then ended up in some juniors, which were promptly taken over by Victoria Gold. And then it sat for over a decade in Victoria Gold because, I mean, as the name implies, this is not exactly a core asset for them. But it had enough merit that they maintained it. And, through Derek's connections, we were able to extract it for a very reasonable price. And, I think this is a good example of our, exploration philosophy, which is to identify high value assets and then not pay, exorbitant prices for them, right? You need to basically add value, not give it away. And
just to the highlight of the terms, it was a small cash payment, $20,000, $200,000 in stock, a 2% royalty, with a 50% buyback right by Victoria Gold if they want to call themselves Victoria Gold and Nickel. And then 2 bullet payments, $2 million and $5 million at various milestones.
Yeah, that's assuming we found the deposit. Yes. So
that's in kind of a win-win situation. That's assuming you found the deposit, and they've got a 50% buyback. Oh, so I mentioned that. So there we go. So it's the $7 million plus their optionality to not miss out on a giant one if you found it.
No, exactly. And I think this is really the way deals should be done, because this allows us to go in, put the money into the ground, right? And if we're successful, yes, they do have a little bit of a win, but, obviously the majority of the interest is in Palladium One. and everyone's happy at the end of the day, right? Whereas if you just take 100% and take a massive dilution hit, well, no one's really winning unless you win, right? So, I mean, this allows us to test this target. And, if we'd like to go into a bit more detail, I'll throw it up here.
Yeah. Bring it up.
Yeah, so this project is, even though it's in the Yukon and people have a bit of an issue with this is not a remote project. This has actually got easier logistics than Tyko. This thing's only 4 kilometers off the Alaska Highway. And there's actually a campground right here, like with lodgings and cabins and stuff that you can stay at. And exploration companies have stayed there, including Teck in the past, as a logistical hub. Derek and I were just up there last month. We walked this road, which is a good gravel-based road. It needs to be brushed out, but we had no problem getting in. And it was worked fairly extensively in the 50s and the 60s. There's about 500 meters of development on that small nickel deposit. But it's not the little deposit that we're interested in. So what we see here is a really good analog to, say, some of the Sudbury systems, not the meteorite impact, but with an embayment structure and a footwall deposit. See, normally footwall deposits don't occur in isolations. They're usually the result of a much larger deposit within the main body. And we think that has yet to be found. So down here where we have the footwall deposit, we have this bit of an embayment structure. And Falconbridge was onto this. They drilled this embayment structure shallowly and hit a disseminated zone of mineralization with little patches of net textured sulfide. And so they just didn't get deep enough. That's my thought. And so the plan is for us to go in and drill some 500-700 meter holes, do some downhole EM, and look for that larger fire, the big concentration massive sulfide, because the system is pregnant. If you look at along the dike, you can see a series of high-grade showings along the dike. And so we know that there's nickel in the system, and we have this unexplained footwall deposit right at this flexure in the dike. So we think this is an excellent trap for massive sulfide, and is going to be a very easy, hypothesis to test. So the plan is to get the permitting done this winter and be out there next summer drilling.
Okay, and similar permitting to Ontario, officially 3 months, potentially a little bit longer.
Oh, it'll be a little bit longer. I think they say officially about 6 months. So every jurisdiction in Canada is completely different. They are all trying to accomplish the same things, but the regulations are different. And so, I do believe that we will have some delays, but we do have some time. We've started the process already of engagement. It was the reason Derek and I were up there last month. And so, this is just another par for the course these days that these timelines have to be taken into account, right?
And when you talk about downhole geophysics, what do you going to do? Downhole EM or downhole IP?
Downhole EM is what we'd be looking for. So this is going to be a massive sulfide target if we want to really kind of develop this thing. So we think there's good potential for it. This footwall has some pretty high grades. Yes, there's 400 million tons at 1.3% nickel, but there's higher grade intercepts within that. And so, we think that there is some good mineralization to be found within the main dike. And so it's going to be a downhole EM story, yes.
And is there anything you can do from the surface? Is there geochemistry? How much work how much historic exploration is there across this project area in terms of kind of the surface work?
And surface work, you can see these showings up here. These were prospecting, right? So there's really no drilling on the north part. On the south part, there is a bit of drilling near the historic footwall deposit. A lot of that's old, for which we don't have that data. But we do have the most recent drilling that's in the sill, and it's this stuff down here, which I think is most interesting. This 0.8% nickel over 3 meters. I mean, that's not a very wide intercept, but that's out of a disseminated zone. So you have pretty good tenors in the sulfide. And so I think this is really the potential here, is that you have a buried system, right? So it's not completely blind. There's smoke at the surface, but the main fire is at depth, and that's really what we want to test here.
Good. Okay, so
I should also mention that this is part of a 150 kilometer, the Kluane-Mayfield belt. So it's a large system. It's not in isolation.
Yeah. Great. So that's something for the summer. That's a very good reason for. Could you drop the screen, please?
Sure.
In a way, that's exactly why you want an expert on your board of directors, to provide some input and just to say, well, have a look in this area.
Yeah, no, for sure. There is
what
one other. Go ahead.
Go on. I was going to say, what does Peter Lightfoot think about the Tyko and the tonalite and the kind of the genetic model that you've got going there and the discoveries you've made?
Oh, he thinks it's quite interesting, and once again, it's an atypical system, right? So, I mean, if he was following the checklist, he wouldn't have been there either. And so, it's very interesting for him that there is that level of preservation. But I think that the fact that we are finding more stuff that is getting the checklist with those, Canalask systems and stuff like that, it's starting to look a little more traditional in that sense, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, he'd looked at it back when he worked for Vale too, right? So he'd been to some of those showings, 20 years ago.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Good. And you said there was one more thing that you wanted to mention.
Yes. So I really wanted to kind of talk about the KS target up in Finland. So this is on the theme of high-grade nickel. And if I could share one more slide, I promise to be quick. So Finland is known for its bulk tonnage, and that's because we basically were able to budget for a number of ounces found, right? So this marginal series of the Kolisma complex, we have 38 kilometers of mineralized horizon. We've only basically drilled off about 5 or 6 of it, and we have 4 million ounces. So finding more resources up there is fairly simple. And so that's what we invested in early. But we also have this massive gravity anomaly that is interpreted to have fed the Kolisma complex and perhaps other Proterozoic or Paleoproterozoic rift-related intrusions like the chemichrome mine way to the west. And this had been known for years. And it was interpreted to be caused by a massive accumulation of ultramafic accumulates. But no one had ever tested it until last year. Geological Survey of Finland drilled a hole about 5 kilometers to the east of our property boundary. And it was supposed to be a 3,000 meter hole. They actually lost the hole at about 1,500 meters because they left for Christmas. But the last 100 meters was peridotite. So tall serpentinite altered peridotite. And so they did confirm that the gravity anomaly is due to ultramafic rocks. Yeah. And at surface, we have this weird pseudo-conglomerate, they call it out there. It looks like Sudbury breccia. It lies along the crest of this gravity anomaly, and it's basically the expression of heat at surface. It's probably original Archean structure that this Canalask structure followed, and it's pumped a tremendous amount of heat into the rocks, and it's actually melted the orthogneiss in this area. And what you see here is, this chloritic matrix with partially digested orthogneiss clasts. So what I'm getting at is that there's been a tremendous amount of magma flux through this conduit, and that's what you want to see for a Voisey's Bay or Norilsk type system. So this is the more big game hunting. If this was the farming exercise, we are looking at doing some MT this winter, and then market conditions, because this is hard dollars, we would be looking at drilling this next summer, and it would be deep drilling and downhole geophysics looking for massive sulfide. And if we could find massive sulfide, it might be incredibly rich. The sulfide tenures at LK are very rich. So in 100% sulfide, this stuff would be running about 3 ounces PGEs, 10% nickel, 13% copper. So if those sulfide tenures hold for the KS structure, it will be worth a fortune. So, this is sort of the ultimate big game hunting exercise we have here. And so I just wanted to bring this forward that a lot of people associate us with the bulk tonnage, and that is true. We have 4 million ounces palladium equivalent, which is a very nice resource, but we also have a lot of high-grade nickel targets in this company.
Thank you. And
stop sharing there.
Yeah, great. Well, it's funny. Yeah, you say a lot of people associate with the bulk tonnage, but I'm going to be looking very closely at the spacing and the tenor of those drill results from Tyko over the next, what have we got now? 3 months? No, the next 5 months, pretty much until PDAC. Hopefully, going to bring some core to PDAC.
Oh yes, we had some core there last year, or this spring, I guess, last year. We'll have some more. Yeah, no, it does produce some spectacular stuff.
And I think the market's going to really respond to, or perhaps the catalyst you need for the market to respond is kind of stringing some of those closer space holds together. It's one thing to show a 20-kilometer trend, but it's building out the the prospect scale, building out the potential to add tons, even if it's not a resource. We're not talking at a resource conversation level yet, but just kind of proof of continuity along strike and perhaps at depth.
Yep, and we are working at that. So, I mean, while we had to take a break for the moose hunting season up there with the rig, we had the downhole geophysics crews on West Pickle. So, we're going to be using that tool to follow that zone because we haven't defined the limits of it yet.
And can just asking why so much work at West Pickle relative to Smoke Lake? Did you not want to get back into Smoke Lake and do some kind of expansion work out there, or was it just because you got some good results in West Pickle and therefore you're just kind of following your nose there?
Well, that's obviously the new high-grade discovery. So, no, we did do work at Smoke. We did IP this past winter over it to chase that, and we have a couple of new targets out there that we are looking to test. We did do some drilling out there just before the break, and we are remobiling the drill to that area right now, actually, as soon as we can start drilling again in a couple of days' time. So it has not been forgotten. We are going to be having some results for it. But, when you have a brand new high-grade discovery, well,
Yeah. No. I'm not. I understand how it goes, but no, it's great that you're still going to cover Smoke Lake as well. Good, Neil. Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed learning more and understanding that schematic you showed me with the in-depth block models of the formation of the kind of the Tyko style mineralization was really helpful. It's very good to learn about Canalask, KS, and to hear about the news plans and what you've got forward. So I look forward to following those and maybe see you at PDSC.
Oh, for sure. And thank you again for your time. It's been very fun to really dive into the geology here. So.